When we speak about Ahqaf, we are not merely speaking about a place buried beneath layers of sand, nor are we speaking about a myth or an exaggerated tale meant to frighten people. We are speaking about a real nation, a people who once walked this earth with confidence, strength, and an unshakable belief that they were untouchable. The people of Ad lived in a land described as Ahqaf, vast sand dunes, yes, but also a region of stability, resources, and architectural brilliance. They were not weak people. In fact, the Qur'an reminds us that they were physically powerful, unmatched in their time, and this is important because destruction in Islam is never associated with weakness alone. It is often tied to arrogance that grows out of strength. Psychologically, this is where the problem began. When a person or a nation experiences prolonged success, the human mind slowly shifts its reference point. Gratitude transforms into entitlement. Dependence on Allah quietly turns into confidence in the self. At first, it is subtle. We worked hard for this. Then it becomes bolder. We built this with our own hands. And eventually, it reaches a dangerous conclusion. Who is stronger than us? This was not merely a statement of pride. It was a worldview. The people of Ahqaf did not just possess strength. They worshipped it. Philosophically, this is one of the most dangerous illusions of human civilization, mistaking capability for permanence. When Allah gives power, wealth, or influence, it is meant to test humility, not inflate ego. But the people of Ad treated their strength as proof that they were favored unconditionally. They assumed that blessings were guarantees, not responsibilities, and when that assumption settles into the heart, moral accountability becomes an inconvenience. Truth feels like an attack. Guidance sounds like criticism. This is why arrogance is not simply a moral flaw, it is an intellectual disease. It distorts perception and blocks self-reflection. What is remarkable is that their downfall did not begin with disobedience in action alone, it began with disobedience in thought. Once a nation believes it is self-sufficient, it no longer sees the need for correction. Advice becomes noise, warnings become jokes, even the idea of divine authority feels outdated, and this is why Allah mentions them repeatedly, not because of their buildings or their strength, but because of their attitude. They stood tall physically, but spiritually they were hollow, and this is where the story becomes uncomfortable for us, because Ahqaf no longer feels distant. We live in an age of technological dominance, data, speed, and control. We measure progress in numbers, influence, and visibility, and without realizing it, the same psychological shift takes place. We begin to believe that advancement equals security, that intelligence equals independence. That systems will save us even when values collapse. The sand dunes of Ahqaf may be ancient, but the mindset that destroyed them is very much alive. Allah did not destroy the people of Ahqaf because they were strong. He destroyed them because they forgot who gave them strength. There is a profound difference. Strength combined with humility builds civilizations. Strength combined with arrogance buries them. And before the wind ever touched their homes, pride had already erased their hearts. So the story of Ahqaf is not asking us to fear destruction. It is asking us to awe at our gratitude, to question whether our success has made us closer to Allah or further from Him. Because when strength stops reminding you of your Creator, it quietly begins preparing your downfall. When power replaces submission, decline does not announce itself with noise or chaos. It arrives quietly, disguised as confidence, dressed as progress. The people of Ahqaf did not wake up one morning and decide to rebel against Allah. Their downfall was far more subtle and far more dangerous. It began the moment strength became their source of security instead of their Lord. This is how internal decay always works. It does not start with destruction from the outside, but with distortion on the inside. Psychologically, the human mind craves certainty. When Allah grants power, stability, and control, the nafs quickly attaches itself to these gifts. Over time, reliance shifts, dua becomes less urgent. Reflection becomes less frequent. The heart slowly learns to trust what it can see and measure rather than the one who cannot be seen but controls all outcomes. For the people of Ad, their physical might and social dominance gave them the illusion that submission was optional. They did not deny Allah outright, they simply no longer felt they needed Him. This is where philosophy meets faith. Submission to Allah is not weakness, it is clarity. It is the recognition that no system, no structure, no human ability is self-sustaining. But when a nation becomes intoxicated by its own achievements, it redefines submission as humiliation. Obedience feels limiting, moral boundaries feel outdated. The question subtly changes from what does Allah command to what suits us now. And once that shift happens, truth becomes flexible, molded to convenience rather than conscience. The people of Ahqaf believed their power insulated them from consequence. They saw strength as protection, not as a trust. This mindset creates a dangerous psychological loop. The more powerful a society becomes, the less it tolerates accountability. Advice is interpreted as jealousy, warnings are seen as negativity, correction feels like an attack on identity. And when that happens, decline accelerates because the very tools needed for reform, humility, listening, self-critique are no longer accessible. What makes this lesson so relevant is that internal collapse often looks like success from the outside. Infrastructure expands, influence grows, confidence increases, but inwardly values erode, compassion weakens, responsibility disappears. When submission to Allah is replaced by submission to ego, people begin to justify what once troubled their conscience. Wrong becomes manageable, excess becomes normal, injustice becomes necessary, and slowly, without realizing it, a nation trains itself to ignore its own moral alarms. Allah did not punish the people of Ahqaf because they questioned. He punished them because they refused to reflect. They were not destroyed for being intelligent or capable. They were destroyed because they believed intelligence made revelation unnecessary. This is the height of arrogance, to assume that human reasoning can replace divine guidance. Yet history shows us repeatedly that when intellect operates without submission, it builds tools faster than it builds wisdom. And this is where the story turns toward us. Every time we trust our status more than our prayers, our influence more than our ethics, our planning more than our dependence on Allah, we walk the same psychological path, not toward strength, but toward fragility disguised as control. Because the moment power replaces submission, the soul loses its anchor. So before decline appears in our societies, it appears in our hearts. Before destruction reaches cities, it reaches conscience. And the real question the story of Ahqaf asks us is not whether we are powerful, but whether our power still bows. In the midst of a culture intoxicated by its own strength, Allah sent them a man who did not look powerful by their standards. Hud did not arrive with an army, wealth, or influence. He arrived with clarity, sincerity, and an unwavering commitment to truth. And this alone made him a threat. The story of Hud is not just about a prophet speaking to a nation. It is about what happens when truth enters a space that has already decided it does not want to be disturbed. Psychologically, societies rarely reject guidance because it lacks evidence. They reject it because it demands change. Hud spoke to the people of Ahqaf with logic, compassion, and patience. He reminded them of the blessings they enjoyed, the strength they possessed, and the source from which it all came. But instead of reflection, his words triggered defensiveness. When a community builds its identity around dominance, any call to humility feels like an insult. This is why they mocked him. Mockery is often the final refuge of those who cannot refute truth, but refuse to accept it. What is striking is Hud's approach. He did not begin with condemnation, he began with concern. He spoke as one of them, not above them. He appealed to their reason, their history, and their sense of gratitude. This reveals something profound. Divine guidance does not seek to humiliate, it seeks to heal. Yet healing requires admission, and admission requires humility. The people of Ad were not lacking intelligence, they were lacking openness. Their hearts had already closed the door before Hud ever knocked. Philosophically, Hud represented everything their society feared. He stood as proof that moral authority does not come from power, but from alignment with truth. His presence challenged the illusion that strength equals correctness, and this is deeply uncomfortable for any civilization that measures worth by dominance. Accepting Hud's message would have required them to admit that their success did not make them self-sufficient. It would have forced them to place limits on their ego, and for a nation built on pride, this felt like surrender. Notice how they responded. They did not engage his message sincerely. Instead, they questioned his sanity, accused him of foolishness, and demanded signs. not because they wanted belief, but because they wanted delay. This is a classic psychological defense. When people do not want to change, they raise the standard of proof beyond reason. They keep moving the goalpost, hoping truth will eventually grow tired and leave, but truth does not need validation from those it challenges. Hud remained patient, consistent, and dignified. He did not adjust his message to gain acceptance, nor did he soften truth to preserve comfort. This balance is essential. He warned them without hatred and invited them without compromise, and when rejection became persistent, he entrusted the outcome to Allah. This teaches us that guidance is not about control, it is about responsibility. A messenger delivers, a society chooses, consequences follow naturally, and here is the uncomfortable mirror for us. How often do we react like the people of Ahqaf when guidance reaches us, not from prophets, but from reminders, advice, or even quiet moments of conscience? We label it negativity, we dismiss it as outdated, we attack the messenger instead of examining the message, because deep down we sense that accepting it would require us to change. The tragedy of Ahqaf was not that Hud came too late, it was that they rejected him too early. They silenced the voice meant to save them, and this is the lesson that echoes across time. When truth is mocked long enough, it stops knocking. So the question is not whether guidance will reach us. It always does. The question is whether we will recognize it before pride convinces us that we no longer need it. One of the most misunderstood aspects of divine justice is the assumption that punishment comes suddenly, without warning, without space for return. The story of Ahqaf dismantles that assumption completely. Allah did not erase the people of Ad overnight. Long before the wind arrived, mercy arrived. Long before destruction, there was delay, and in that delay was an invitation, quiet, patient, and generous, for repentance. Psychologically, human beings often misread delay as approval. When consequences do not arrive immediately, the mind begins to relax, it assumes safety. If this were truly wrong, something would have happened by now. This is one of the most dangerous inner dialogues a person or a nation can have. The people of Ahqaf experienced drought, hardship, and warnings, yet instead of reflection, they interpreted survival as validation. Their hearts grew harder not because Allah was silent, but because they misunderstood his patience. Allah's justice is never impulsive. It is precise, balanced, and deeply rooted in mercy. Every warning given to the people of Ahqaf was a chance to recalibrate, to soften, to return. Even the droughts were not meant to destroy them, they were meant to wake them. Hardship in this sense is not always punishment. It is often communication. But communication only works when the receiver is willing to listen. Philosophically, this reveals a profound truth about accountability. Allah does not hold people responsible without first making them aware. Guidance is sent, reminders are repeated, time is extended. And this is why destruction, when it finally comes, is never unjust. It is not the first response, it is the last resort. The tragedy of Ahqaf was not that Allah was harsh, it was that they exhausted mercy without realizing it. What makes this lesson so relevant is that we live in an age that celebrates delay as freedom. People say, "I'll change later, I still have time, it's not that serious yet." But the Qur'an repeatedly teaches us that delay is not a sign of safety, it is a sign of opportunity. Opportunity to repent, opportunity to realign, opportunity to humble oneself before the door quietly closes, and that door does close, not out of cruelty but out of justice. The people of Ahqaf were given signs in layers. Intellectual signs through Hud, emotional signs through hardship, environmental signs through drought, yet they demanded miracles while ignoring messages. This reveals another psychological reality. When the heart resists accountability, it demands spectacle instead of sincerity. It asks for dramatic proof while rejecting subtle truth, but guidance does not always come with thunder. Often it comes as discomfort, as unease, as a quiet reminder that something is wrong. Allah's mercy is not passive. It actively pursues the servant, it warns before it strikes, it softens before it breaks, but mercy must be met halfway. When warnings are repeatedly ignored, the delay that once protected becomes evidence against. At that point, justice is not cruelty, it is closure. The people of Ahqaf crossed that threshold not because they sinned, but because they refused to return. And this is where the story reaches us personally. Every moment of awareness, every reminder that touches the heart, every chance to correct a wrong is a form of divine mercy. The question is not whether Allah warns us, He always does. The question is whether we recognize warnings while they still come as whispers, not storms. Because when mercy speaks softly and we refuse to listen, justice eventually speaks loudly, and by then, reflection is no longer enough. It is too late to act. When the punishment finally came, it did not come in a form that matched the people of Ahqaf imagination of power. It was not an army, not an earthquake that shattered the ground beneath their great structures, not a force they could challenge or negotiate with. It was a wind, something they had felt their entire lives. Something they considered ordinary, and yet, through that wind, Allah dismantled an entire civilization. This alone carries a lesson so deep that it unsettles every illusion of human control. Psychologically, human beings fear what looks powerful and visible. We prepare for enemies we can identify, we build defenses against threats we can predict, but we rarely consider that what we dismiss as insignificant can become overwhelming by the will of Allah. The people of Ahqaf thought in terms of scale, large structures, mighty bodies, immense strength. In their minds, destruction had to be equally grand, and this miscalculation exposed the fragility of their world. Philosophically, the wind represents the collapse of false certainty. It moved without permission, without warning, and without regard for their strength. It stripped away the belief that control belongs to those who appear dominant. This is a recurring pattern in divine history. Allah often uses what humans underestimate to humble what they overestimate. Water drowned Pharaoh, fire cooled for Ibrahim, and wind erased the giants of Ahqaf. The lesson is clear: control is not about size, but about authority, and authority belongs only to Allah. The people of Ad had built their identity around invincibility. Their architecture stood tall, their bodies were strong, their confidence was loud, but the wind did not argue with their claims. It did not negotiate with their arrogance. It simply executed a command. This is deeply unsettling to the human ego, because it exposes a truth we try to avoid, that our systems, our preparations, and our calculations operate only within boundaries set by Allah. What makes this moment even more profound is that the wind initially appeared as a sign of relief. They saw clouds and thought rain was coming. They celebrated what they believed would restore comfort. And this is perhaps the most painful psychological lesson of all, that sometimes what we welcome is what ends us, not because it is evil, but because we misread reality. When perception is distorted by arrogance, even mercy can look like entitlement, and even warning can look like good news. The wind did not just destroy structures, it dismantled illusions. It exposed how powerless strength becomes when severed from submission. It showed that a civilization can be architecturally advanced and spiritually bankrupt at the same time. And when that imbalance reaches its peak, collapse does not require complexity. It requires permission. This is not a story meant to terrify us into paralysis. It is meant to awaken us into awareness. Every time we place ultimate trust in technology, systems, wealth, or influence, we recreate the mindset of Ahqaf. Every time we believe that preparation guarantees safety without humility, we forget the lesson of the wind. Because Allah does not need what we fear to humble us, He uses what we overlook, and so the question is no longer whether we are strong, prepared, or advanced. The question is whether our sense of control has made us forget the controller, because the wind that destroyed Ahqaf still moves today, not to erase nations, but to remind hearts that nothing stands without Allah's permission. At this point, the story of Ahqaf no longer belongs to the past. It refuses to stay buried beneath sand and centuries, because Allah did not preserve this narrative as archaeology. He preserved it as a mirror. A mirror does not exist to entertain you, it exists to confront you, and the final lesson of Ahqaf is not about what happened to them, but about what could happen to anyone who walks the same internal path. The Qur'an does not present destroyed nations as distant tragedies, it presents them as patterns. The people of Ahqaf were not unique in their arrogance, nor were they exceptional in their resistance to guidance. What made them notable was how perfectly they represent the cycle of human behavior when success detaches from accountability, strength leads to pride, pride leads to denial, denial leads to dismissal of warnings, and dismissal, when sustained, leads to collapse. This is not ancient history, It is human psychology repeated across time. One of the most uncomfortable truths is that civilizations do not fall when they become weak. They fall when they believe they are immune. Moral decay always precedes physical destruction. Values erode quietly. Accountability becomes selective. Wrongdoing is justified through language, policy, or culture. And because this erosion is gradual, people adapt to it. What once felt unacceptable begins to feel normal. This is how nations collapse while still appearing strong. The story of Ahqaf challenges us to examine ourselves not at the point of failure, but at the point of comfort. Because that is where danger hides. When life is stable, when influence is growing, when systems seem reliable, the soul is most vulnerable to forgetting Allah. And forgetting does not always mean denial, often it means neglect. Salah delayed, gratitude reduced to words, dependence shifted from dua to strategy alone. This is how the heart slowly disconnects while the body continues to function. Philosophically, Ahqaf reminds us that remembrance is a form of protection. Not remembrance as ritual alone, but remembrance as awareness. Awareness that success is a trust, that power is temporary, that control is borrowed. When a society loses this awareness, it becomes efficient but not ethical, advanced but not anchored. And such a society does not need an enemy to destroy it. It collapses under the weight of its own imbalance. This mirror is not meant to produce fear. It is meant to produce responsibility. Allah is not asking us to abandon strength, progress, or ambition. He is asking us to anchor them in humility, to let growth increase gratitude, not ego, to let power deepen submission, not arrogance, because when strength bows, it becomes worship, and when it refuses, it becomes evidence against its owner. The most hopeful part of this lesson is that the door that closed for Ahqaf remains open for us. We are reading their story while still alive, still aware, still capable of choosing differently. Reflection today can prevent regret tomorrow. A softened heart now can prevent a hardened fate later. This is the mercy hidden within the warning. So as we walk away from the ruins of Ahqaf, the question is no longer what destroyed them. The question is what will protect us. And the answer is simple, but demanding. Never allow your strength to grow faster than your humility. And never let your success become louder than your remembrance of Allah.